In this lesson, we'll begin to use some modifiers to add some geometry to our splines. So here in 3ds Max, using modifiers to build up geometry makes a lot of sense. It's going to create a very procedural type of workflow for us so that we can go back in, tweak the settings and parameters that we want to really get the object looking the way that we want to, and still have the flexibility to go back and change things later on, and also to go through and animate some of the different portions of our logo. So to do this, what we want to do is select a particular spline. So in this case, I'll just select the main spline here, and I'll add a modifier to this. So to the stack, we will add a bevel modifier, and you can see right off the bat that it just adds some geometry here from going from the back, basically where that plane starts, and then shooting out into the front. Now we can change some of the bevel values here. If we go down to our bevel and bevel values rollout, we can change under the level 1 height, we can change that value. So if we were to, for instance, set that to -1, we can push that back if we'd rather have the logo coming back from the splines, but I'll go ahead and leave that at 1. We can also choose whether we want to cap the start or the end. So the start is going to be this plane here. Okay, so you can see we've turned that off, so that now there's no cap on the end, on the start rather. And if we go ahead and turn off the end, you can see that it doesn't have a cap on that side either. Okay, so we can decide, which side we need to have a cap, if we need to have both sides have a cap. So just go ahead and turn both of those on. All right, we can now, if we take a look at this, and you can see that since the spline here was part of this spline, that it's actually taken that and cut that out, which is kind of what we wanted to happen. So keep that in mind when you're building out your splines and creating geometry based on those. So if we go into our bevel, right now we have a level 1 and we have the height set to 1. So it's taking this height out from here. We have no outline, so it's coming straight out. So what we want to do is now add a little bit of a bevel on the edges. It helps to kind of ground things and add a little bit more realism, and get that kind of nice highlight around there on some of the edges. So a lot of times beveling those edges is going to be important. So let's click on level 2. And here we have height settings and outline settings. So let's go ahead and set the height to something like maybe 0.01 or 0.02 to kind of bring that out. And if we turn on our edged faces, we can kind of see that a little bit better. You see how that's now pulled out a little bit. And now on the outline, we want to actually have that pulled in a bit. So I'm going to set the outline to -0.01. And you can see how that just kind of pulls things in. And so now we get a nice wide hit on that edge rather than a completely sharp edge. And you can play around with the exact bevel settings that you want. Okay, we just kind of simplify things here and create the thickness with a little bit of a bevel. All right, now we can go ahead and start to work on some of the other areas, and it depends on how thick you want the logo to be. You can always go back and change these values in here and even kind of animate those. So I'm going to change that to, and leave it at a setting of 1. And now this spline, which I've gone ahead and attached to the spline on the other side, we can add another bevel to this. And now it keeps the settings that we have, so it's giving us the same bevel that we had on the other piece. Now, in this case, we may want this to extend out a bit further. All right, so we can go ahead and just pull that bevel height out a bit. So maybe make that 1.25, and we can change these settings as we go here. All right. Now we may want to change the type of bevel that we have here. So on this one, let's go ahead and on level 2, we'll go ahead and set the outline to something like maybe 0.03. Okay, and we'll change our surface from linear sides to curved sides, and we'll up the number of segments. So let's change the segments to maybe 5 or so. And so you can see it gives us that kind of rim out here. Now I don't want it to be quite that deep, so we'll go back into level 2 on the height, and we'll change that value. So maybe change that to 0.1, maybe 0.2 or so. And so it's not quite that deep. And we can change these values here as well. Maybe bring this back in. Okay, so now it's kind of pulling this out. If we take a look at our edged faces, you can kind of see that. We've got those divisions and creating that curve. Okay, and now we can go through and do the same thing on our other wings and change the bevel based on what we want. We can take this spline down here, we can add a bevel to that. It's going to use the same parameters that we have here. So depending on the look that you want, maybe we want that to be, again, that kind of flat bevel. Based on the look that you want, you can change that up. So make this maybe a smaller bevel. Okay, maybe change that height, take the height down a bit. We'll take our segments down to 1. Okay. Maybe make that a bit smaller. Okay, so we get a nice tight bevel down there. You can see how that just really helps by giving us a nice highlight and hit right along those curves. Helps kind of define that shape a little bit more. Okay, and then you can do the same thing up here. All right, so let's go ahead and start to add some bevels and just play around with some of the settings of level 1, 2, and 3 and see what you get. But the great thing about this is at any time we can go ahead and turn off that modifier. You can see our splines are so far still in the same position. If we want to get rid of this bevel, we can certainly do that. And we can start to build on top of these modifiers so that we don't, so that we leave our spline untouched, so that we can go back in and make changes to the spline if we want to. We can make changes to any of the modifiers in our stack, making for a very flexible workflow using this procedural type technique. And this is really a great thing about 3D Studio Max here, 2011, is that procedural type of workflow that we can use. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to add some bevels to some of these other pieces using some different parameters. And then in the next lesson, we'll look at how we can really kind of speed up the workflow even more in instancing some of these modifiers so that we can add them to several objects at once and have those parameters kind of guide those objects. So we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.